Hello friends, my name is John Thrower, and this is Thrower Overboard. Socialism was a term coined by Vladimir Lenin, brought in the single-party state. It seems to me that this is a very real threat here and now in Canada. I want to take a look at 8 steps in how to create a socialist state, and the 8 steps, just running down the list, is healthcare, welfare, poverty, education, religion, class warfare, debt, and gun control. Now, I've actually brought number 8 on the list in the article, poverty, up to what will now be number 3, and everything else shifts, just because welfare and poverty, I think, go hand in hand there. But number 1 is healthcare. It says control healthcare, and you control the people. Now, we have a buffer, fortunately, here in Canada, where it's actually the provinces that handle the healthcare and not the federal government. So there is a bit of a buffer here. But you can see what the concern is, though. If there are no options other than what the government provides, if you have no other choices, no outs, if you will, what say do you really have? Where do you go? Want faster service? Don't look to the government. You have to go down to the states. You're basically placing your health in the government's control, in their hands. Number 2 is welfare. Take control of every aspect of their lives, food, housing, and income. On this one, I think we're fairly safe so far. Now, there were some attempts at this, again, more so on the provincial level than the federal. The Liberal Ontario government was bringing in a universal basic income before the Conservatives got in and then scrapped that. But consider, would people who ended up on that universal basic income ever want to get off of it? What would be the incentive to do so? Free money. I can do whatever I want? Yeah, sign me up. And think about what kind of power that gives to the government that provides that for them. Would they ever vote against the party that is literally paying them? It's like paying for votes. Even with the current My Sharona Shirus funding for Canadians, it's like another test, this time at the federal level, of getting more and more people on the government payroll. Did you know that almost 1/6 of the Canadian workforce was unemployed? That's a lot of people depending on the government. And there's many others who had reduced hours, and the government was also kind of propping them up as well. And these same points, as I mentioned earlier, kind of fall in line with what is my number 3 now, poverty. That is, increase the poverty level as high as possible. But notice the reasoning here. It says, poor people are easier to control and will keep socialists in power if they are providing everything for them to live. So it goes back to wanting the government to control every aspect of your life. And if they are controlling that, if they are providing everything for you, well, what are you going to do against them? You're relying on the government rather than yourself, rather than those around you. I'll just add that small businesses seem to obviously have been hit harder by the My Sharona Shirus and the crumbling of the economy than big businesses. It just further adds to keeping the little guy down and propping up those who already have the wealth and power. Number 4 is education. It says, take control of what people read and listen to. Take control of what children learn in school. This is probably the most frightening and really, I think, the most universal, probably if you look from country to country, at least in the West, as it is something that is indeed already happening here in Canada, happening in the US, and really around the world. It is known that leftist ideologies are the predominant mindset in teachers and educators. President Trump, love him or hate him, has actually acknowledged and spoken out against the indoctrination that is happening in our schools. Well, in the US schools. Did you know that 1 in 5 university professors identify as Marxists? You know, the communist folks? That's far left, like left, far left. These are the people who are teaching our children. There are more extreme left educators than there are just simply moderate conservatives or conservatives as a whole in schools. Consider that, and it's no wonder that the younger generations always start out more liberal. They're being taught by liberals, extreme liberals. This is most frightening because this is affecting the minds of the next generation. There's a saying to teach people how to think rather than what to think, and I'm afraid that's not what is happening in our schools. People are teaching them what to say, what to do, what to think, rather than how to think for themselves. It's like we've crossed into the dystopian future of George Orwell's 1984, where you're not taught math, you're just taught 2 + 2 = 5. Number 5 is religion. That is, remove the belief in God from the government and schools. And this has clearly happened. And really, religion is incredibly important for a free and just society. And consider, even if you aren't religious, even if you don't believe, there should be an acknowledgement about the importance of religion. It gives people purpose. It fosters unity of values and develops community. And it helps fix broken things, broken people. Consider, what are the steps that you're supposed to go through if you are struggling with addiction and want to overcome it? What are the 12 steps? Now, I'm not going to go through all of them, but pay attention to the first 3. And the first 3, as it's written in the article even of these steps, the first 3 steps are considered the most important and form the basis for recovery. So that is right after accepting that you are powerless, that you do need help, that you are in trouble. Right after that, number 2 is accepting that there is a power greater than you who can restore you. A part of the healing process, the restoration process, is recognizing that there is a God. And followed by that, number 3, is deciding to turn your will over to God. Get help from Him, not just acknowledge Him, but get help from Him. It's like it's needed to heal people who are truly struggling. You need to recognize that there is that higher power. But why do we wait till people are truly struggling, are going through addiction problems, are hurting, for that to be addressed? Imagine if we as a nation and as a society did that before being broken and needing restoration. Number 6 is class warfare. And it says to divide the people into the wealthy and the poor. This will cause more discontent and will be easier to take, that is, tax the wealthy with the support of the poor. And this sounds all too familiar with more and more cries to tax the rich further and further and further. Another way of looking at this is to consider, rather than the wealthy and the poor, the haves and the have-nots. And another way of considering that, which I think really hits home with a lot of the culture war going on, is the oppressors and the victims. And we see a lot of that. That comes down to identity politics, political correctness. It's creating groups of the acceptable and the bigoted. And this is a problem everywhere. Free speech, especially here in Canada, isn't as free as it used to be. We have hate speech laws and, even in certain positions, compelled speech laws. Things that you have to say. The government has said you need to say this. A class war, a culture war is being waged here and now. And really, if you think about it, it's a religious war. It's a war about morals and values, about what is right, what is wrong, what is righteous or virtuous, and what is deemed unacceptable. Number 7 is debt. Increase the debt to an unsustainable level. I mentioned earlier that we've crossed here in Canada over to $1 trillion in debt. We've joined the Trillionaire Club. Over a third of that trillion in debt was added this year. So a third of our overall country's debt was added this year over the first few months. Now, I acknowledge with how things turned out this year that there was no getting around running a large deficit. But the problem is the preparations, or the lack thereof, coming into this year. The preparations beforehand were horrendous. We were running deficits and stacking up debt in the years when the economy was booming, going good, meaning that, of course, when we hit the rough times, there's going to be an even larger debt. We don't have as much wiggle room. Canada's credit rating has even dropped. And I think the purpose of a large debt as a step towards communism is that once the number gets large enough, adding to it doesn't seem as bad. We have over $1 trillion. What's a few billion more? With this mindset ingrained in the people, and I've met people and worked with people who have this mindset already that the government can afford it, not knowing where does the government get its money. With this mindset ingrained in people, why not have the government fund everything? Anything and everything. If it means more debt, who cares? And of course, if they are funding everything, They're really in control of everything. Speaking of control, number 8 is gun control. It says remove the ability for the people to defend themselves from the government, and this one is pretty self-explanatory. You don't want the people being able to stand up to an all-powerful government, which will no doubt in time turn tyrannical. Maybe it'll start nice, maybe it will be somewhat of a utopia if the government is in control, but as Lord Acton said, power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. That is, the more power you have, the more risk of failure, and the greater the failure if you do falter. And imagine that on a nationwide scale. Having all that power, it's going to absolutely corrupt. This parallels the biblical teaching of Jesus on the difficulty of a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. A wealthy person, a powerful person. That is, though, it's not impossible, but it's difficult. But we could see the power already going to the current liberal government's heads. They are effectively left unchecked despite them being in a minority government situation. They're supposed to have less power, but they're acting with what seems like even more. They shut down Parliament for a time, and in May pushed through a huge gun ban without any discussion, without any vote. It was never brought to Parliament. That sounds like a dictatorship to me. It sounds dangerously close to a tyrannical communist government. Canada, watch out. And don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you're not from Canada, don't worry, you're welcome as well. Come on in, friends. I hope you enjoyed the perspective, and also like and subscribe.